Hello YouTube and welcome to the Gunpla Network. I'm the Spicer and today's review of the 2011 Master Grade Gundam 00 Riser from Gundam 00's second season is brought to you by none other than Canadian Gundam. Canadian Gundam is your one-stop shop for all things Gunpla and Plamo here in North America. With a private warehouse option, flat rate shipping to the US and Canada, and a vast warehouse that's restocked regularly, they'll have you covered. When you're checking out that vast catalog and placing your next order, don't forget to use the promo code Gunpla Network to save yourself 10% off. As we take a look at the base Gundam 00 itself, it's pretty visually pleasing. It's not as big as bombastic as the 00 Riser, of course, but all the same base units are still there as you'd expect. The GN Sword 2s look good and have some panel lining opportunity. You have a little bit of panel lining opportunity on the legs, on the arms, and a little bit on the torso, but generally speaking, much like with the real grade, this is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of opportunities for panel lining. That being said, they do make a point to do a lot more of the inner frame or inner working showing than what the real grade does. You see it up on the GN drives there in the shoulders. You see it in the actual shoulder unit itself, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. You see some gray coming through on the wrists between the white and the blue. There's just little bits kind of poking out here and there that help break up the blue or the white on this kit. So it is maybe not the most detailed kit in the world, but it does do its job well in not being just a solid color or having blankets of solid colors. It's very broken up. It's very visually dynamic, I would say. There's a lot of visual interest all over the kit, so you're not going to be too bored with it, but it's not a lot of extra work to put in unless you really want to go scribing and doing all of that. I do have to say, visually speaking, this is maybe not my favorite of the two of this and the Gundam 00 Riser total, but I do have to say, I'll talk about this more at length in a moment, this is by far my favorite in terms of actually moving it around, because the 00 Riser moves the center of gravity significantly further back, and it makes things a lot more difficult. But generally, in this configuration, I think it looks pretty nice. The Riser unit itself also looks very good. You have more panel lining opportunities here if you decide to take them. The orange canopy pops quite well on this, but I do believe you get a clear one as well. I didn't really want to use the clear one, which is why we see the orange, but you have it if you decide to do that. The wings on the tops and the bottom of the binders move. The little white pointy pieces on the back ends also move. However, they're only held in with polycaps on one side on each side. Confusing, I know, but since there's two connection points there in the back for each of them, there's only a polycap on one. Very strange. No idea why they did it this way, but it makes them incredibly loose. So do be warned, those will probably move around, and I'll point them out more in a second, but visually speaking, the Riser is nice. One thing I will say though, the GN Sword 3 does have to be attached to the Riser for it to be put on a stand. You don't have a stand attachment on the bottom of the Riser by itself. Little strange, but it's neither here nor there. I think Bandai knew not a lot of people were posing this by itself, so take with it as you will. Both units by themselves look good, but what do they look like when they're combined? All put together, and the Gundam 00 Riser is pretty impressive visually speaking. You do get some kind of hidden moving parts on the little shoulder binders with the blue part popping out for some extra GN verniers maybe. I'm not really sure what's in there, but that's kind of the look that the little pieces in there have. The little wing binders on each side can rotate, move, or not rotate, but they can move up and down, and then the little blue blades pop out. They're held on fairly well. I have had some issues with them staying in with the GN condensers versus the GN drives, but they're pretty solidly in there for as heavy as they are. The GN binders do lock, or the actual connection point where the GN drives are do lock as well, much like the real grade. But I think the mechanism works a little bit better here, but it only has like one or two solid settings where they really stick. So not the most abundant in posability, but it works. It's fine. Generally speaking though, you're going to want this on a stand. It's going to be a lot more visually impressive that way. You can have it on the ground, flat-footed. It will stand, but you're going to have a few issues I'll talk about in a moment with that center of gravity moving back with the riser on the back. But overall, you get all the really nice visuals once everything's together. Now, looking at the accessories, the GN Sword 2s are quite nice in beam rifle and sword mode. They do have little connection points that can be added to the side and plugged into the side skirts if you decide to do so. As you see, the side skirts kind of move down there, so you can plug them in. If you're not using them, they just move back up, no big deal. It's not a sliding mechanism, you do have to pick the part up and put it back in, but it works fine. The swords are pretty nicely done. They really don't plug into the arms though, which I've just not figured out. I thought I was doing something wrong, but that's not the case. Neither of them plug into the spot in the forearm where it looks like they would plug in. A little weird. Only affects the rifle mode. If it's in sword mode, it's not a big deal. The beams, the scopes, if you will, are molded in clear green plastic, just like all the little GN parts on the knees and the elbows and the wrists and the head. They look very nice. They're exactly what you would expect. These are very serviceable weapons, and it's kind of a shame they get overshadowed by the GN Sword 3, unfortunately. They do have two big effect parts that come with them. Not really sure exactly how you're supposed to use them though, because they don't run the same direction the blades do, which is a little strange, but they do look cool nonetheless. They're big effect parts. They are a little heavy, so they will make some poses a little more difficult. Definitely not to the same extent the GN Sword 3 does, but they hold fairly well. Just kind of weird to get them in a good pose with them at the angle that they're at, but they plug in just fine. They're secure, no big deal there. I will say, take the hands off to put these on, because they do like to, for whatever reason, pop the arms off at the bicep. I've had that happen to both arms multiple times throughout actually posing and filming this review, so kind of keep that in mind. I don't know if maybe it's just the way I'm moving them, but it is a problem I've had reoccur. Other than that though, they're very serviceable and they look just fine. We also have two beam sabers, which are probably the least exciting weapon on this kit, but they still look pretty good. They're serviceable. You can have kind of poses where they're pulling them off the back skirt. It looks fine. They're there if you want to use them. You can have them going forward or kind of held reverse grip style if you would like to do that. Really your preference. Another one of those weapons I don't think people are really going to be posing this kit with, but it is an option if you decide to use it. We also have the little shield parts. There are two of them. They do stick together, but they do not like to stick in the peg in the forearm, so I don't have them that way because they will just pull themselves out of the forearm. You can put them individually on each arm if you decide to do that, but you know, another one of these accessories that it's cool that it comes with it. If you want to stick it on the binders on the riser unit, you can do so, but generally speaking, another one of those things that gets relegated to a plastic baggie. As you can see, the beam saber hilts do swivel off to the side to where you can grab them with one of the hands. You have the kind of 3-1 and a thumb hand that opens up that you can use to get this kind of a pose. The other one is the 3 are kind of pre-molded and don't move a lot. The trigger finger is a separate finger but also doesn't move very much, and then you have the opposable thumb. So you have some options, but once again, most people are really going to be here for that GN Sword 3 with the riser unit. And in rifle mode, it looks pretty solid. This is actually the better of the two modes, I'd say, as the sword mode does have some weight issues that I'll examine in a moment. But generally speaking, I like this quite a bit. As much as I love those GN Sword 2s, the GN Sword 3 really does it for me. One of the coolest weapons, not just in Gundam 00, but I think of any Gundam that I can think of off the top of my head. It's iconic. That big green blade, the cool like 3 to 4 barrel thing going on with it. It's a very unique design. The hand fits in fairly well. Once again, pop the hand out to get that peg in there and then be very careful putting it back in. It doesn't attach to anything on the top of the forearm, but there is a peg in the bottom of the blue piece for the back of the forearm, so you can get it in there pretty stably if you decide to do so. Now, you can get quite a few poses out of this, as heavy as it is, as it centers the weight much more towards the arm than further extended, so moving it out a little bit further and aiming the head a different direction is totally plausible. That being said, it's not the same for the sword, unfortunately. I did leave it in this configuration for a reason, as once you get it into actual full sword mode, it becomes a weight nightmare, and the only thing holding it to the Gundam is the little peg in the hand, and as much as I like the ability to move the wrist joint up, down, left, and right, it does make it weaker to where it cannot hold the full weight of the GN Sword 3 in that mode. However, you can leave it plugged into the forearm on the bottom here in this configuration and it works just fine. And I believe, if I remember correctly, this kind of a setup is used pretty regularly in the series, so you don't have to worry too much about not really replicating similar poses. It is something to take into consideration if you want to use this in full sword mode. You're probably going to need some kind of support or a stand, but generally speaking, like this, you don't need any of that, so it's a pretty solid option. I actually quite like this, and this would probably be the pose I'd leave it in on my shelf if I decided to put it up on a stand, but space being what it is, I unfortunately don't have that option at this time. Now, the last big accessory we get is the beam effect part for the GN Sword 3, and if you already had weight issues before, you're definitely going to have them now, as even with this plugged into the forearm, it is too heavy to have extended out, so you will need a stand for this. Even on, the kit itself is on the ground and is holding it very well, but it is because it is supported and resting on the knee. So, as cool as this is somewhat impractical. I'm sure you can absolutely use a stand to prop it up, but generally speaking, I don't foresee too many people really going to that extent just to have this cool beam effect part on. For some photography here and there, it's a great option, but generally speaking, on your shelf, probably not going to be an option you use. The last accessory that is worth mentioning is you get two GN condensers to go on either side of the GN drives. However, they're very loose, at least in my opinion. The two I have don't like to stick in to the base part of the GN reactor or into the actual shoulder cavity, so keep that in mind. It may be that I'm not lining them up right or something, because there's a set of grooves that they have to go into, but generally speaking, they are not something on this kit I ever foresee using. They are kind of cool looking, they're a little different than the GN drives, but they're a very minor cool accessory that even if you have them on, you're probably not going to notice them the vast majority of the time. Now with it up against the real grade, I have to say there are things I like about the Master Grade, there are things I like about the real grade, but both are perfectly serviceable units of the 00 Riser. So if you're a fan of them, either one works, just depends on your preference in size, scale, and shelf space. I will say that there are more nuances, I suppose, or nice little extra details that the Master Grade adds, and they both kind of suffer from the same weight issues, so you do have a little bit of a disadvantage for both of them there. As you can see, I removed the riser backpack here because it just loves to pull that center of gravity back, so while it's not impossible to stand on its feet, and it's actually fairly easy comparable to like a lot of seed kits, it is still something you need to think about when putting it in a pose like this. I'd say the real grade does a very good job in its scale. However, it really is a personal preference of whether you like 1/144 or 1/100. Overall, both are very solid options for any Gundam 00 Riser fan or just any Gundam 00 fan in general. Now, of course, I'd be remiss in not comparing it to the Kyrios and Dynamis. Nearly 10 years newer, and they both are, I would say, just as good, if not better, than the 00 Riser. There are some weird finicky things on the 00 Riser that I'm not a huge fan of, but generally speaking, they are very serviceable. Some more well thought out compartments and designs on the two newer kits are of course going to be due to that newness, if you will. but they're not going to look all that different or be all that different build-wise from the 00 Riser. So even though it is a little older, if you like these two kits, you're going to like this one. If you're a Gundam 00 fan, or just a fan of main Gundams in general, this is not a bad kit to pick up. I'd say the only reason to not pick this up is if you don't like master grades or they're prohibitively expensive. If you have the shelf space, this is a great addition to any display, even if you don't have a lot of Gundam 00 stuff, as it is probably one of the most visually eye-catching just due to its size and its silhouette. As always, friends, I'm the Spicer here for the Gunpla Network. Please do your best to stay safe and keep on building.